You think family drama only happens in movies. Not here. On booze. And every story is real. Every tear is true. And revenge sometimes. It's paid in blood. Hit subscribe. You don't want to miss what's next. The Perfect Life. The sun rose slow and golden over San Francisco Bay, spilling light across rows of terracotta roofs and glass towers that caught fire with morning. From the balcony of a neat two-story house in the Sunset District, Ethan Miller stood with a mug of coffee and a heart full of quiet certainty. At 35, he believed he had finally built the life every man dreamed of. Steady work, a beautiful wife, 2 healthy daughters, a home with laughter in its walls. He loved mornings like this, the faint salt of the ocean, the gulls circling over rooftops, the sound of his girls chasing each other through the kitchen below. The smell of toast and cinnamon drifted up from the open window. For a few seconds, he closed his eyes, letting the warmth of it sink into his chest. "Daddy, you promised pancakes." The call floated from downstairs, Ella, 9 years old, commanding as a queen. "I'm coming," he shouted back, grinning, and set the mug aside. Inside, Sophie, his wife, was at the stove, her hair twisted into a loose bun. Even in an old t-shirt, she carried the effortless poise that had first drawn him in a decade ago. Her laughter came easily, but this morning there was a thinness to it, a tiredness she tried to hide. "You were supposed to flip the pancakes," she said without looking up. "I was appreciating the sunrise," Ethan replied, kissing her cheek. "You appreciate a lot of things lately that don't get done." He laughed it off, but the edge in her tone lingered. They had both been working too hard. Sophie freelancing as an interior designer. Ethan closing deals for a mid-sized real estate firm downtown. The mortgage, the kids' tuition, the car payments. They kept him on a treadmill that never stopped. Yet, when he looked at his daughters, Ella with her curiosity, Grace 6 with her shy, unguarded smile, every exhaustion felt worth it. Over breakfast, the girls recited plans for the day. School, a field trip, a dance lesson. Ethan half listened, half watched Sophie. She was scrolling through her phone, her brow furrowed. "You're thinking about that remodeling project again," he said. "I'm thinking about the budget," she murmured. "And the fact that your friend still hasn't paid you back for the short-term loan you helped with last year." Ethan waved a hand. "Howard's good for it. You worry too much." "Howard always looks good for it," she said quietly. "Until he isn't." The friend. He met Howard Blake 10 years earlier, back when they were both junior agents hustling for commissions. Howard had a charm that could bend steel. Sharp suits, a quick grin, a way of making everyone feel like the most important person in the room. Ethan had admired that confidence, even envied it. When Howard left to start his own development company, Blake and Associates, he kept in touch, inviting Ethan to poker nights, barbecue weekends, business mixers. Over time, their friendship became almost brotherly. So when Howard called one late Friday evening saying he was in a bind, Ethan didn't hesitate to listen. That call would change everything, though he didn't know it yet. It happened 3 months before the morning of pancakes. Ethan remembered every detail, the rain tapping on his car roof, the hum of the city at dusk. Howard's voice on the other end of the line had trembled, just enough to sound desperate. "I wouldn't ask if it wasn't life or death. The bank's stalling a loan on my new project, waterfront condos. I need collateral for 60 days tops, just to show liquidity. You've got equity in your house, right? I'll pay every cent back. Hell, I'll add 10% interest for your trouble." Ethan had frowned. "You want me to mortgage my home for you? Just a temporary bridge. I'll clear it fast. You know me." And that was the problem. He did know him. He knew Howard's silver tongue, his big gestures that somehow always landed on their feet. Yet he also remembered the nights Howard had lent him a sympathetic ear when work got rough, the times he'd watched Ethan's kids so Sophie could rest the speeches about loyalty and brotherhood. When Ethan hung up, Sophie had been standing in the doorway, arms crossed. "Don't even think about it," she'd said. "He just needs help," Ethan replied. "He needs discipline," she shot back. "Not your house." They argued long into the night, voices rising then falling to exhausted silence. In the end, Ethan convinced himself he was doing the right thing. A good man helps his friends. That's what his father had taught him. He signed the documents the following week, convincing himself the ink was temporary. Now, 3 months later, the papers lay forgotten in a desk drawer. Life had resumed its rhythm. Until that morning when Sophie mentioned the debt again. Howard promised 3 months, she said, placing plates in the sink. That was 4 months ago. Ethan shrugged. I'll call him today. You said that last week. He sighed. Sophie, please, he's my friend. She turned eyes sharp. And I'm your wife. The words landed heavier than he expected. He wanted to tell her she was overreacting, but something in her expression stopped him. At that moment, Ella spilled syrup all over the table, and the argument dissolved into chaos. By the time he cleaned up, kissed the girls goodbye, and left for work, the conversation had already turned into one more thing to fix later. At the office, the real estate firm buzzed with the usual Monday frenzy. Phones ringing, deals closing, laughter masking exhaustion. Ethan slid into his cubicle, loosened his tie, and tried to focus on a client contract. But the numbers blurred. He kept thinking about Howard. Around noon, he picked up his phone and dialed. Howard Blake, came the smooth voice. Hey, it's Ethan. My brother. How's life? I was going to ask you the same thing. Any news on that loan? A pause. Then Howard laughed lightly. That. Yeah, still waiting on some paperwork. Don't worry, I haven't forgotten you. I'm not worried, Ethan lied. Just checking in. I've got you covered, Howard said, the same way he might tell a waitress he'd already paid the bill. Give me a couple more weeks. Ethan wanted to believe him. The conversation ended with promises and jokes, but as he set the phone down, a knot formed in his chest. That night, he told Sophie. She didn't even look up from folding laundry. Of course he said that, she murmured. He knows you'll believe him. Ethan bit back a reply. He didn't want to fight again. But later, lying awake beside her, he realized he couldn't remember the last time she'd rested her head on his shoulder. The crack appears. 2 weeks later, the first letter from the bank arrived. Notice of payment due. Collateral agreement, number 4729. Sophie found it in the mail pile and set it wordlessly on the kitchen counter. Ethan read it 3 times before understanding. His interest payments on the line of credit had begun. He called Howard immediately, voice shaking. Hey, got a letter. Looks like the loan's active. Yeah, standard protocol, Howard said. Don't sweat it. I'll settle it this month. Can I see the repayment schedule? Ethan, come on. Don't you trust me? That line, so casual, almost playful, should have been the alarm bell. But loyalty once planted deep grows stubborn roots. Ethan forced a laugh. Of course I do. A week turned into 2. The letter from the bank sat on the kitchen counter like an accusation yellowing at the edges. Every time Sophie walked past it, she glanced at it, then at him, then away again. They stopped talking about Howard out loud, but the silence between them carried his name. At night, after the girls were asleep, Sophie scrolled property listings on her tablet. Smaller homes rentals, safe places to land if everything collapsed. Just in case, she'd said when he caught her once. Stop planning for disasters, he'd replied. I'm planning for survival. He hated that tone, resigned, cold, the voice of someone already preparing to live without him. At the office, his focus splintered. Clients noticed. His supervisor, a sharp woman named Carla, called him into her glass cubicle one morning. You look like you haven't slept in weeks, she said. Everything all right? Just family stuff, he muttered. She nodded. Then fix it. The market doesn't wait for anyone's family. Her words stung because they were true. Real estate was a shark tank. Pause and you drowned. But as he left her office, he thought, what's the point of selling homes when I'm about to lose mine? That evening, he called Howard again. Straight to voicemail. The next day, same result. By the 3rd day, the number rang once and cut off. Sophie watched him pacing the living room, phone in hand. He's avoiding you, she said flatly. He's probably traveling. Ethan, he looked at her. Her calm face, the patience almost gone. and knew she was right. Confrontation. Friday afternoon, he drove to Blake & Associates, a glossy new building in the financial district. He'd never been there before. Howard always met him elsewhere over beers or golf. Inside, everything gleamed. White marble floors, the Blake logo etched in chrome. At the reception desk, a woman with red lipstick looked up. "Can I help you? I'm here to see Howard Blake." "Tell him Ethan Miller's here." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but he'll want to see me." She typed something, frowned slightly, then spoke into her headset. After a pause, she said, "Mr. Blake's in meetings all afternoon." "I'll wait," Ethan said. She hesitated. "He asked me to tell you he's unavailable." Something cold slid down his spine. "He knows I'm here." "Yes." He stood there for a long second, trying to process it, then turned and walked out into the sunlight that suddenly felt too bright. That evening, he sat in his car outside the girls' dance studio, watching through the glass as Sophie tied ribbons on Grace's slippers. She didn't see him. For a fleeting moment, he envied the simplicity of that small act of care, the world that still felt safe to them. When they came out, the girls ran to him, chattering about twirls and music. Sophie said nothing. During the drive home, rain began to fall, the wipers thudding like a heartbeat. At dinner, Ella asked Daddy, "Why is Mommy sad?" Sophie forced a smile. "Mommy's just tired." Ethan wanted to tell his daughters that everything would be fine, that grown-ups fixed things, but the words stuck in his throat. The collapse begins. 2 months later, a second notice arrived. This one stamped "Final Warning." The bank was initiating foreclosure proceedings. Sophie held the envelope in trembling hands. "I told you," she whispered. He tried to explain, but his voice broke halfway through. That night they fought, truly fought, for the first time. Shouted words neither could unsay. "You chose him over us. I was trying to help a friend. You were trying to be a hero. You think I wanted this? Then why did you sign that paper, Ethan? Why did you think anyone cares about your loyalty more than our daughter's home?" When she turned away, crying silently, he realized that for the first time in 10 years, he didn't know how to touch her without making things worse. The next morning, Sophie packed 2 suitcases. She didn't slam doors, didn't scream. Quiet decisions hurt more. "I'm taking the girls to my sister's," she said. "Until you figure this out." He stood in the doorway as she buckled Grace into the car seat, Ella clutching her stuffed bear. "Sophie, please." She met his eyes. "Fix it." Then she drove away. He watched the car disappear down the street, the sound of the engine fading like a heartbeat dying out. The house felt cavernous, each room echoing with the absence of laughter. The call. That evening, he called Howard again and again. Finally, on the 6th attempt, the line connected. Ethan Howard said, voice smooth but distant. "Look, I'm in the middle of something." "You lied to me," Ethan said. His voice trembled with restrained fury. "You said 3 months. I'm handling it. Calm down." "The bank's taking my house, Howard." A pause, then a sigh. "You should have read the fine print before signing, buddy. It's under your name, not mine." Ethan's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying it's business. You made a choice. Don't make it my fault you didn't protect yourself. Business." Ethan repeated, disbelief turning to rage. "You begged me for help." "Begged." "Come on, E. You offered. And now you're getting dramatic." "I've got meetings. We'll talk later." The line went dead. Ethan sat in the dark, the phone heavy in his hand, the world shrinking around him. He didn't sleep that night. He wandered through the rooms, touching objects like they were ghosts. Grace's pink blanket, Ella's crayon drawings on the fridge, Sophie's perfume bottle on the dresser. He realized each thing would soon belong to strangers. At dawn, he stepped outside. The sky was pale gray, the street silent. A "for sale" bank-owned sign already leaned against the front yard fence. He laughed once, a short, broken sound. The final blow. The following week, 2 men from the bank arrived. They were polite, almost apologetic, as they handed him official papers and asked for the keys. Ethan signed numb. He watched them change the lock and drive away. Then he sat on the curb with a small suitcase. Half his clothes, a few family photos, a coffee mug with the word home printed on it. Rain began to fall again, soft at first, then harder. Across the street, neighbors peered from windows, pity mixed with curiosity. He stood, slowly pulled his jacket tighter, and walked. He didn't know where he was going, only that every step away from that house felt heavier than the last. He spent that night in a cheap motel off Highway 101. The neon sign outside flickered vacancy in red letters that bled through the curtain. He lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to cars rush by. For the first time in his adult life, Ethan had nothing left to lose, except the need to understand why. He whispered to the dark, "You took everything, Howard, everything." And in that moment, something inside him hardened. Not despair, but the beginning of resolve. Morning filtered through the grimy motel blinds in fractured stripes of gray. Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling, as though answers might appear in the cracks. His phone buzzed beside him. 3 missed calls from the office, 2 unread messages from Sophie that simply said, "Please stop calling, and I'll update you about the girls next week." He turned the screen face down. The light still leaked around the edges. He rose, showered, shaved mechanically, and dressed in the same clothes from yesterday. There was a point in a man's collapse where even dignity became a habit rather than a feeling. He pocketed the last $200 he had and left the motel, walking without destination. The city looked different now. Not the bright mosaic he'd once admired from his balcony, but a moving blur of glass and concrete that refused to notice him. People hurried past, faces focused on screens, voices sharp with purpose. He envied them. They had somewhere to be. At a diner near Market Street, he ordered coffee and nothing else. The waitress, a woman with tired eyes, slid the cup toward him without asking questions. He sat for hours, watching steam curl and fade, replaying every decision that had brought him here. He remembered Sophie's warnings. The way her voice had broken the night she said, "You're choosing the wrong man." He remembered signing the papers, shaking Howard's hand, hearing the easy laughter that now echoed like mockery. He remembered the house, the laughter of his daughters, the warmth that used to fill each room. And he realized with a sudden clarity that his ruin had not been a single betrayal, but a series of small, polite deceptions, and his willingness to believe in them. The confrontation. By noon, he was standing in front of Blake and Associates again. The marble and glass gleamed beneath the weak winter sun. He walked through the doors before doubt could stop him. The same receptionist blinked up at him. "Sir, I'm not leaving this time," Ethan said quietly. His voice was calm, but his eyes were not. "Mr. Blake isn't available." "Then make him available." She hesitated, then picked up the phone. Moments later, a tall man in a navy suit, one of Howard's assistants, approached. "Mr. Blake can't see you. You'll have to go." Ethan took a step closer. "Tell him if he doesn't come out, I'll walk upstairs and tell every investor in this building how he built his empire on a stolen home." That did it. Minutes later, Howard appeared in the hallway, irritation disguised as charm. My God, what are you doing here? You can't just—" "You lied to me," Ethan said. Howard's smile didn't falter, but his eyes hardened. "Lower your voice. This is a place of business." "You used my name for your loan," Ethan continued, stepping forward, then vanished when the bank took my house. "Your house was your responsibility," Howard snapped. "You signed the documents. You promised to pay it back. Promises aren't contracts." The words hung there cold and deliberate. Employees had started to glance up from their desks. Howard noticed and lowered his tone. "Ethan, look. Things got complicated. I had to move money around. You'll get something back eventually. But showing up here like this, it's pathetic." Something inside Ethan broke, quietly, almost imperceptibly, like a thread snapping under tension. He didn't shout. He didn't lunge. He simply nodded once and said, "You're right." Then he turned and walked out. Howard watched him go, momentarily thrown by the ease of it. What he didn't see was the way Ethan's hand curled into a fist as he pushed open the door. The breaking of a man. The next few days passed in a blur. Ethan returned to the motel, packed his bag, and moved into a small one-room apartment on the edge of the city, a converted basement with one window that looked out onto a brick wall. He took whatever work he could find, odd jobs for real estate agents who still remembered him kindly, freelance appraisals, small-time property inspections. Each paycheck barely covered rent, but it kept him moving. At night, he wrote letters he never sent, to Sophie, to his daughters, to Howard. In them he poured out every regret, every apology, every unspoken rage. He tore them up after finishing each one, the sound of paper ripping a small mercy. Sometimes he called Sophie, but she rarely answered. Once she picked up. "Ethan, please stop," she said. "The girls are fine. They don't need to see you like this. I can fix it," he whispered. "Then fix yourself first." The line went dead. Weeks slipped into months. Winter melted into early spring. Ethan's hair grew longer, his clothes looser. The city no longer felt like home. It felt like proof that the world kept turning even when you didn't. But beneath the exhaustion, something began to stir. Not just anger, but purpose. He started following the news about Blake and Associates, new contracts. Glossy photos of Howard shaking hands with politicians, headlines about record profits. Each article ignited the same thought, that money came from me. One night, unable to sleep, he opened his old laptop and began to search deeper. Corporate filings, investor lists, subsidiary companies. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, only that he had to see the structure of Howard's empire, to understand how thoroughly he'd been used. What he found shocked him. Buried in the public records were shell companies linked to offshore accounts, names that appeared only once, transfers that vanished into other names. Ethan didn't yet know what it meant, but he recognized deception when he saw it. Howard had not just stolen from him. He had built his success on fraud. The discovery didn't bring peace. It brought direction. For the first time since losing everything, Ethan smiled, not with joy but with intent. The spark. The next morning, he returned to his old firm to pick up a paycheck. Carla, his former supervisor, spotted him in the hallway. "Ethan," she said cautiously, "you look better." "I've been thinking," he said. "If I wanted to find out whether a private developer was hiding losses through dummy companies, how would I start?" She blinked. "Why?" "Curiosity." She studied him for a long moment. "Developers do that all the time. You'd look for irregular tax filings, money moved between shell entities, unregistered subsidiaries. Why?" He smiled thinly. "Let's just say I want to understand how far friendship can stretch before it snaps." That night, Ethan stood on the roof of his apartment building. The air smelled of rain and electricity. Below him, the city pulsed with light, indifferent, alive, endless. He thought of Sophie and the girls of the house now owned by strangers, of Howard's smug face framed by success. He realized he could either drown in regret or learn to swim through the wreckage. The moon broke through the clouds, pale and sharp. He looked up at it and said aloud, "You took everything from me, Howard. Now I'm going to take everything back." His voice didn't echo, but the wind seemed to carry it anyway out across the sleeping city. Epilogue of Chapter 1. 2 days later, Ethan applied for part-time work as a property analyst at a small firm downtown. The position paid little, but gave him access to real estate databases and proximity to people who talked about developers' contracts and money trails. Each evening after work, he combed through public records and online archives. He learned the language of finance like a new dialect of vengeance, offshore transfers, shell corporations, limited liability loopholes. Slowly, a map of Howard's corruption took shape. Every betrayal, Ethan realized, leaves a paper trail, and he was going to follow it until it led him back to justice. The first chapter of his ruin had ended. The next, the chapter of retribution, had already begun. He opened a new notebook, wrote a single sentence at the top of the page: "Trust was my mistake. Justice will be my repayment. Then he began to plan. San Francisco's rain turned from winter needles to a fine spring mist that made everything look forgiving. Ethan wished it were true. The city-like people could look soft and still cut you open. His new apartment sat half a block from a freeway on-ramp. One room, one window, one hot plate whose coil glowed the same color as the taillights outside. At night, the wall shook with trucks. In the mornings, the air smelled like someone else's dinner. He told himself it was temporary. That word, temporary, was an elastic thing stretched until it lost meaning. He kept order because order was easier than hope. The bed was made tight every day, the desk cleared, the mug rinsed and turned upside down on a paper towel. He pinned a cheap corkboard above the desk and dotted it with Post-its, bank contacts, hearing dates, itemized debts, a list titled Job Leads that grew longer and more desperate. He'd learned that despair could be managed if you sorted it into bullet points. On a Sunday, the first warm one of the year, he met Sophie and the girls at the playground near her sister's place. He hadn't seen them in 2 weeks. The gap felt like a bruise he kept pressing. Ella ran to him first, her arms around his waist in a grip that almost hurt. Grace hung back as she often did, then rocketed forward to wrap around his legs. "Hi," Sophie said. The word was polite but distant. "You look well," he managed. "It sounded like something you said to acquaintances." "We're okay." She glanced toward the swings. "They miss you. I miss them." He swallowed. "You." Sophie watched the girls kick skyward, hair flying. "Howard called me," she said, suddenly, eyes still on the swings. "He said you've been harassing his office." Ethan stared. "He called you. He wanted to reassure me that you're going through a phase." She almost smiled at the ugliness of it. A phase. "I went there twice. The second time to demand what he owes. That's not harassment." "It is if security escorts you out." He flushed. The girls shrieked in delight. The sound made the conversation feel indecent. "I'm not here to fight," he said. "I'm here to see them. I know." She wrapped her arms around herself despite the sun. "Just don't make me their translator. They ask questions." "What do you tell them?" "That we're figuring things out." She turned to him now. "Are we?" He wanted to say yes. He wanted to promise that the world would snap back into its old shape. But the truth had started to feel like a diet he could actually keep. "I'm trying." "Try faster," she said quietly, then softer. "They need a father who isn't a hurricane." He bit his lip until he tasted metal. When the visit ended, the girls kissed his cheeks and ran back to Sophie, who took their hands without looking at him. The three of them walked away, a shape he recognized and could no longer enter. Back in the apartment, he sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the corkboard. Try faster wasn't a task you could write down. He still tried more part-time shifts, more calls to banks, more voicemails that began with, "I'm following up," and ended with silence. The second foreclosure notice's echo lived in him. He dreamt of locks turning and woke with his hand already reaching for a key that wasn't his anymore. On Tuesday, he stopped by the old firm to collect a check and found his supervisor, Carla, waiting near the elevators with 2 coffees. She handed him one without ceremony. "You still standing?" she asked. "Not elegantly," he said. She studied him. "You're good at the work, Ethan. Not just the schmoozing, the due diligence. You read fine print." "Irony, I know." He tried to smile. "I can't bring you back full time," she said. "Budget and politics. But there's a developer we're vetting. They hired us for an independent market report, and I need someone who'll actually look, not just nod. You want it?" "Yes, pays hourly. Long hours, boring as hell." "Perfect," he said, meaning it. She handed him a folder. "Don't screw it up." On the bus back to his neighborhood, Ethan held the folder in his lap like a fragile animal. Inside parcel maps, historical permits a stack of pro formas that smelled faintly of toner. He skimmed, let the numbers steady him. Work was a blessing because it didn't care how you felt. It only cared if you could count. He didn't intend to think about Howard. But patterns have a way of speaking. The pro formas the developer gave the firm were prettier than they had a right to be. Returns smoothed risks, disguised with font size and confident adjectives. It reminded him of a different set of documents, the ones he'd signed when he mortgaged his house. Pages designed to soothe a nervous mind. That night, he pulled out his laptop and opened the folder he'd begun in secret, Blake Webb. On the screen, a scatter of rectangles, LLC's DBA names holding companies, connected by arrows like a crime show he'd once mocked. He wasn't a forensic accountant. He was a man with time and a wound. Sometimes that's enough. He clicked through the Secretary of State's website, cross-referenced addresses, noticed the same P.O. box feeding 3 different entities. He chased the P.O. box to a registered agent that represented hundreds of shells. He followed an EIN to a foundation that existed only on paper and had donated to an event whose photos featured Howard with a mayor. He sat back, rubbed his eyes. There was a difference between suspicion and a case. He didn't have the latter. He had a map drawn in pencil and anger. Pencil smudges easily. Anger smudges faster. He needed help, not a friend. He had burned that word. It was no longer safe to touch. He needed someone who understood money the way he understood floor plans. He thought of the receptionist at Blake & Associates' lipstick headset, a glance that said she knew exactly what the men upstairs were. He thought of the quiet accountant he'd seen once at a holiday party years ago, the one who'd stood alone near the catering table correcting columns on her phone with a look of pure disgust. He hadn't remembered her name then. He didn't now. But he remembered the posture of someone whose job was to keep numbers from lying and who hated when they did. He wrote on a fresh post-it find accounting name. The next morning, between site visits for Carla's project, he detoured to Blake & Associates. He didn't go in the front. He went around back past the loading bay, where boxes were delivered and secrets went out with the recycling. He waited. Delivery drivers swapped jokes. A maintenance guy smoked and watched pigeons fight over a bagel. An hour later, employees started slipping out for lunch, badges swinging, voices soft. He kept his head down, pretending to read his phone, and listened. 2 women in pencil skirts. Lena said, "We're reconciling Q1 next week." He looked up. "Sorry," he said too quickly. "Did you just say Lena Accounting?" They both blinked. "Who are you?" "Courier," he lied. "They told me to ask for Lena for a signature." "New policy." The brunette shrugged. "Second floor, end of the hall, corner office that looks like a closet." "Good luck." "Thanks," he said, already turning away so they wouldn't ask more. He didn't go up. He went home. It was enough to have a name. He typed Lena into LinkedIn with Blake & Accounting. There she was, Lena Park, Senior Staff Accountant at Blake & Associates. No smiling headshot. A straightforward list of skills. GAAP audit prep reconciliations. Volunteer work with a community clinic. A quote in the tiny about section numbers, tell the truth if you let them. He stared at that line for a long time, then crafted a message that he rewrote 6 times. Subject: a question about integrity. Confidential. Ms. Park, you don't know me. My name is Ethan Miller. I'm a former friend of your CEO's and a current casualty of his business. I believe there are irregularities in your company's structures that affect more people than me. I'm not asking you to risk your job. I'm asking for a conversation about what it means when numbers are forced to lie. Coffee off-site, your choice. If you ignore this, I'll understand. Ethan. He sent it and closed the laptop like something might explode. He went to the sink, washed a dish that didn't need washing, dried it, and set it down as if plates had ever saved anyone. No reply came that night. He told himself he hadn't expected one. He reminded himself that plans built on the kindness of strangers were just wishes in better shoes. At 6:10 the next morning, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He let it ring once, twice, then answered. Hello. A voice, calm and precise. You wrote to me. Lena. Silence. Then don't use names on the phone. Are you free before work? Yes. There's a bakery on Clement and 10th. Back corner. 20 minutes. If you're late, I leave. The line went dead. He dressed without thinking, forgot to shave, and ran for the bus. The city was still rubbing the sleep from its eyes when he pushed into the bakery's warm sugar air. She was already there, a woman in her early 30s with square black glasses and a cardigan the color of wet cement. She didn't stand to greet him. You have 5 minutes, she said. Thank you for... That's one. He sat. I'm not here to trap you. I know how traps work, she said. You said irregularities. I think your boss... He stopped corrected. The CEO uses shells to float losses and hide personal spending. And I think he used my house as a stepping stone. That part I know. Her jaw tightened. Your house. He told the short version. The words felt practiced, like a confession he'd given to himself so many times, it had lost original pain. She didn't interrupt. When he finished, she looked at him for a long beat. I'm not a whistleblower, she said. I'm not asking you to be. He slid a folded sheet of paper across the table. These are public links. Entity's addresses a registered agent. All legal, on their own. Taken together. He shrugged. It smells. She didn't touch the paper. Why me? Because you look like someone who hates being asked to cook the books. He winced at his own gall. I'm sorry. That was true, she said. They sat with that. You think he'll ever pay you back? She asked. No. You think destroying him will bring your family home? No, he said again, surprised at how quickly the answer came. I think it might make me a person my daughters could respect. Or it will make you a man they don't recognize, she said. Then softer, I know what men become when they chase justice. He exhaled. Then tell me to stop. I don't tell strangers what to do. Are we strangers? He tried a smile he hadn't earned. You know my worst mistake. I know one of them, she said, and finally touched the paper. She unfolded it, scanned, frowned. This registered agent is a joke. Half the city uses them to launder embarrassment. So I'm not crazy. Oh, you might be, she said, standing. But not about this. She put a business card on the table. No company logo, just a number. Don't call this unless you have something new. And don't email. Thank you. I didn't say I'd help, she said, and left. He sat there for a minute, breathing the smell of yeast and coffee, and felt something he hadn't in months: momentum. That afternoon, Carla called. Update. Draft tomorrow, he said. Good. Also, she hesitated. I got a message from a client who says you've been poking around Blake and Associates. Carefully. Ethan's chest tightened. Is that a problem? It is if it becomes a headline, she said. Keep your curiosity separate from my contracts. I will. Ethan, she added, voice lower. Don't make your life about a man who already took it. He swallowed. I'm trying to make it about what he can't take. When he hung up, he wrote another post-it. Separate lives. He stuck it to the edge of the Blake Webb diagram like a guardrail. That night, he brought out the box he'd salvaged from the house before the locks changed photos, the first drawing Ella ever showed without hiding it behind her back. Grace's baby hospital bracelet, one of Sophie's design notebooks with color swatches still taped in. He lined them up on the desk, small proof that his life had not begun with Howard and would not end with him. The city hummed through the thin walls. He opened the notebook to a blank page, wrote a date, and underlined it. He would log each step. Revenge without record was just anger wearing expensive clothes. At midnight, the phone vibrated once. A text from the number on Lena's card. Don't be late to anything. Sloppiness is how men like him win. He typed back, understood. He slept for 4 hours and woke before the alarm, already reaching for the folder, like a man reaching for a rope thrown from a boat he'd fallen out of. Outside, the sky was the color of paper before the first line. He walked into it with his head up. Spring deepened, and with it the pressure. Work kept Ethan upright. Hourly pay, endless spreadsheets, buildings measured in square feet rather than in dreams. Every night he still returned to the one-room apartment that smelled of dust and instant noodles. It was the price of rebuilding, he told himself. Survive first, explain later. 2 weeks after the meeting at the bakery, Lena texted again. Need to talk. Same place. Noon. She was already waiting when he arrived, tapping her phone like a metronome. You didn't get this from me, she said, sliding a flash drive across the table wrapped in a napkin. Audit backups, Q4 through Q1. If they ask, you never saw me. Ethan blinked. You trust me with this? I don't trust you, she said. I distrust him more. Inside the drive were dozens of Excel sheets, expense reports, vendor payments, transfer memos. Most were dull rows of numbers, but buried between them were items that didn't belong: personal jewelry, resort stays, invoices paid to non-existent contractors. The same offshore holding companies from his diagram appeared again and again, camouflaged among legitimate expenses. Howard wasn't just careless, he was arrogant. He had believed his glow of success would blind anyone looking too closely. Ethan printed copies and hid them under the false bottom of his desk drawer. Each sheet felt like a piece of justice in paper form, but he knew evidence alone wasn't enough. The system loved men like Howard. It bent around their money. He needed leverage. The family thread. That weekend, Sophie called. It was the first time she'd initiated contact in months. Grace has a dance recital Saturday, she said. She asked if you'd come. I'll be there. Silence. Then don't come to pick us up. We'll meet you there. I understand. The recital took place in a school gym smelling of varnish and popcorn. Rows of folding chairs creaked under proud parents. When Grace's class came on stage, she spotted him immediately. Her smile lit up the room. For 10 minutes, he forgot everything: the flash drives, the debts, the anger. There was only the small girl in pink satin spinning under colored lights. Afterward, he waited by the doors until Sophie and the girls came out. Grace threw her arms around his waist. Ella stood shyly behind her mother. You were amazing, he said, kneeling. Did you see my jump? Grace asked. I saw all of it. Sophie smiled faintly. She practiced every day. They walked to the parking lot together, awkward, in the way of people who used to share a life. When the girls ran ahead, Sophie said quietly, You look better. Working again helps. And the other thing, he hesitated, still working. She studied him, searching his face for the man she used to trust. Don't lose yourself trying to punish him, Ethan. He's already done that to you once. He wanted to promise her she was wrong, but the truth sat heavy between them. A dangerous pattern. The following Monday, Ethan met Lena in the library of the University of San Francisco, a neutral ground she insisted on. Students whispered between aisles. The smell of paper and dust filled the air. I traced the vendor IDs, she said. Half of them don't exist. The other half are registered to a property management firm in Nevada, on paper only. Guess who the director is? Howard, Ethan said. Close. His wife. She gets the income. He writes it off as development cost. Tax-free. Ethan felt heat rise to his face. Can we prove it? Yes. But proof changes nothing unless someone powerful wants it to. She closed the laptop. You said you worked in real estate. You know investors. Any of them burned by him? Plenty, he said slowly. But they don't know it yet. Then make them know, Lena said. He can survive the law. He can't survive panic. That night, Ethan pulled an old contact list from his phone. Clients, brokers, small-time developers who had trusted Howard's charisma. He wrote a short anonymous email from a new account. Subject: You are invested in a lie. Check the filings for Blake and Associates. Subsidiaries registered under Aurora Property, MGMT, and Blue Water Holdings. Follow the money. He sent it to 10 addresses, waited an hour, then 10 more. By morning, social media whispers had begun. By evening, one of the city business blogs ran a headline, Anonymous source alleges irregularities, in Blake and Associates accounts. It wasn't proof yet, but it was friction, and friction starts fires. When he showed Lena, she raised an eyebrow. "You move faster than I thought." "I've been slow all my life," he said. "I'm catching up. Be careful what speed costs." Backlash. 2 days later, Carla called him into her office. "What did you do?" she demanded. The blog was open on her screen. "Nothing public. They're naming clients we share. If my firm gets dragged into this, we both drown." "I sent nothing from here," he said. "You have my word." "I need more than your word," she said. "I need you to finish the report and then disappear for a while." Ethan nodded. "Understood." As he left, she added softly, "Whatever you think you're fixing, make sure you can live with the result." That evening, Sophie called again. "Did you start something?" He froze. "Why?" "Howard came to the girls' school. He pretended to check on us, said you're unstable." The room tilted. "He what?" "I handled it," she said. "But if you're going to war, keep us out of it." "I would never." "Just promise me," she said, voice trembling. "You won't drag the girls into your fight." "I promise." When the call ended, Ethan sat in darkness. Outside, a siren wailed somewhere distant, the city's lullaby for the broken. He poured himself a drink he couldn't afford and whispered to the empty room, "He came near my family." That was the night the revenge stopped being abstract. It became personal. The next morning dawned bright and indifferent. Ethan barely slept. His mind replayed Sophie's voice. "He came near my family." Each repetition scraped like glass inside his chest. He left the apartment early, carrying the folder with Lena's data. The bus ride downtown felt endless, the noise of commuters, a dull roar that drowned his thoughts. Outside, Blake and Associates reporters already hovered by the doors, microphones poised. The rumor had reached the surface. Howard arrived in a black Mercedes, sunglasses on smile set to untouchable. Cameras flashed. He played his role perfectly. Shook hands, joked, denied everything. Ethan watched from across the street, coffee cup trembling in his hand. That grin, smooth, well-rehearsed, bulletproof, pushed him over the edge. He turned away before rage could make him visible. The line crossed. That night, Lena met him at a 24-hour laundromat. Neutral ground again. The hum of dryers and smell of detergent softened their voices. "I have something," she said, sliding a manila envelope across the folding table. Copies of his internal communications. He orders staff to reallocate funds whenever investors pull out. Ethan opened the envelope carefully. "How did you get these?" "Don't ask," she said. "Just understand what you're holding. If these leak, it's not gossip anymore. It's a crime." He stared at the papers. Emails, signatures, invoices linking shell companies. This could end him. "It could end me too," she said. "If my name shows up anywhere, I'm finished." He looked up. "It won't, I swear." She studied him a moment. "I hope you're the kind of man who keeps promises." Ethan folded the documents and slipped them into his jacket. "I wasn't once. I am now." Back in his apartment, he spread the evidence across the bed like a map of sin. The scale of it stunned him. Millions shifted investors misled entire projects built on falsified valuations. And somewhere among those signatures was his ruin. He drafted an anonymous package for the State Financial Crimes Unit, attached the documents, and dropped it into a mailbox 2 blocks away. When the envelope slid through the slot, something inside him loosened. Not peace, but the first exhale after months of drowning. He thought that was the end. It wasn't. The storm breaks. 3 days later, the headlines exploded. Real estate magnate under investigation for fraud. Whistleblower alleges embezzlement in Blake and Associates. Howard's photo dominated every feed. Expensive suit, arrogant half-smile, the face of a man unaccustomed to consequences. At first, Ethan felt only disbelief. He hadn't expected the system to move so fast. Then came exhilaration, the rush of seeing justice begin, until his phone buzzed. Unknown number. A text. "You think you're safe because you used gloves. You're not the only one who knows how to dig." H. Ethan's pulse spiked. He locked the door, pulled the curtains. For hours he sat by the window expecting footsteps, a knock, a shadow. None came. When he finally dared to call Lena, she answered in a whisper. He knows. Someone told him. Are you safe? For now, I'm deleting everything. You should too. He hesitated. No, we can't back out now. You don't understand, she said. He's scared, which makes him dangerous. Good, Ethan said quietly. Let him feel what I felt, she sighed. Don't mistake fear for victory. Collateral damage. That weekend, Ethan went to see his daughters again. Sophie met him at the door, arms crossed. What did you do? Don't lie to me. Howard's lawyers sent papers to my sister's house. They want statements about your harassment and blackmail. The girls were there, Ethan. He froze. He's trying to use you. He already did, she said, eyes blazing. You started this war, and now you've invited him to our doorstep. I was trying to protect us by burning everything around you. Her voice cracked. You're not protecting anyone. You're just making sure no one forgets you were hurt. The words cut deeper than any lawsuit could. He wanted to argue, to justify, but her face, furious, terrified, silenced him. When he left, the girls were watching cartoons, oblivious. Grace waved from the couch. Bye, Daddy. He smiled through the ache. Bye, sunshine. In the car, he screamed into the steering wheel until his throat went raw. Repercussions. Days blurred again. Reporters camped outside Blake and Associates. Investors withdrew funding. Lawsuits multiplied. Howard fired half his staff and disappeared from public view. Lena sent him one last message. It's done. Don't contact me again. He didn't. But he clipped every article, every news mention, every image of Howard's downfall, and pinned them to the corkboard. Each headline felt like a brick in a wall he was building between past and future. Until one morning a letter arrived at his door. Plain white envelope, no return address. Inside, a single photograph. It showed Sophie picking up the girls from school. Taken from across the street. On the back, a note in sharp handwriting. You don't get to hide behind them. You started this. Ethan's hands shook. Fear and fury tangled in his chest until they were indistinguishable. He grabbed his coat and left. The second confrontation. He found Howard at his private club, the one where deals were made over whiskey older than both of them. Security tried to stop him. Ethan pushed through. The room fell silent. Howard turned irritation flickering into surprise, then into smug amusement. Well, he said, if it isn't the martyr himself. Ethan slammed the photo onto the table. Stay away from my family. Howard barely glanced at it. You shouldn't have provoked me, E. You forgot what game you were playing. This isn't a game. Everything's a game, Howard said softly. You just don't know the rules. Ethan leaned in, voice low and trembling. The rules changed when you took my home. Howard smiled. That same perfect, hateful smile. Then maybe I'll take what's left. You've already lost everything worth keeping. Something inside Ethan snapped cleanly like a bone finally giving way. He grabbed Howard by the collar, yanked him forward across the table. Glass, shattered voices, shouted hands dragged him back. Security threw him into the street. He hit the pavement, palms bleeding. Above him, the club's gold-lettered sign gleamed against the night sky. He laughed once, a raw, broken sound. Dissent and resolve. Back in the apartment, he cleaned the cuts on his hands and stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror. The man looking back wasn't the Ethan who'd once believed in fairness. This man had edges now sharp and necessary. He whispered to his reflection, if you want war, Howard, I'll give you one. But beneath the rage, another thought formed. Quieter, heavier. At what costs? He looked toward the corkboard, the chaos of headlines and notes, and realized revenge had devoured the space where his family used to live in his mind. He sank to the floor, shaking. God, what am I becoming? Outside, sirens wailed again, a city's heartbeat that never slept. After a long time, he stood, tore half the clippings down, left the rest. Justice wasn't over, but it needed to change shape. He couldn't keep losing pieces of himself to win. He sat at the desk, opened a clean page in his notebook, and wrote, New rule hurt him with truth, not with ruin. He underlined it twice. Then, for the first time in months, he slept without dreams. The city sounded different when you were hunting someone. Sirens became omens, footsteps on the stair outside his door, a verdict arriving early. Ethan woke to those sounds and lay still, counting breaths, telling himself the point of counting was not to calm down, but to remember he could. On the desk, 2 piles. On the left, justice, labeled folders, notarized copies, timelines, a letter to the state AG he had rewritten 12 times until it read like cold glass. On the right, everything else. Photos of Howard shaking other men's hands, screenshots of the club, a printout of the text that said, "You started this," the picture of Sophie and the girls from across the street. Justice was neat. Obsession was a nest. He made coffee and forced himself to open the left pile first. The ritual mattered. Numbers, dates, transfers. He was building a bridge across a river that wanted to swallow him. At noon, he met Lena in the atrium of a hospital where no one knew them. The place hummed with clean urgency. Here, people bled for reasons that made sense. "Your package hit," she said without greeting. Auditors everywhere. He's shifting cash like he's bailing a sinking ship with a spoon. And the investors panicking, as they should. She studied his face. "You look worse. Or better. Depends what you're trying to become." "I'm trying to become someone my daughters can point to without whispering," he said. "Then stop collecting trophies." Her glance flicked to the edge of the envelope peeking from his coat. "That photo. Burn it. It reminds me why I started. It also tells you you're allowed to end where he ends," she said quietly. "You're not." He didn't answer. They stood a while, people drifting around them in soft shoes, the elevator chiming like a metronome. Before she left, Lena pressed a page into his palm. Finalized reconciliations. Nothing illegal about them until you lay them next to the emails you already sent. Together they sing. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me. Just don't drown." Back at the apartment, he placed Lena's page on the justice stack, and on impulse slid the photograph of Sophie and the girls beneath it. Buried, not gone. He sat. Listened to trucks on the overpass. Chose a pen that didn't smear. Began to write a clean narrative, how the shells spoke to one another, how the invoices matched time-stamped approvals, how the transfers traced circles until they closed around a single signature. He wrote like a man putting down a weapon in order to build a case. At 3, his phone buzzed Carla. "You're a ghost," she said. "Stay that way." The blog wants an on-record quote from a former associate of Blake. "If they link you, the other side paints this as a grudge, not a crime. I'll stay quiet." "Good." "And Ethan?" Her voice softened. "Silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's the only way the truth can be heard." He hung up and stared at the window. The urge to go loud rose like fever, walk into the lobby at Blake and Associates and read the emails into somebody's camera, tell the world about the house and the girls and the way a man can be emptied with a smile. The fantasy had heat. It promised relief. Obsession always did. Relief was its only pitch. He turned back to the desk and chose the colder work. By evening, the board beside him had become a tidy constellation, red yarn replaced by straight pencil lines. He took a picture of it for the file, and then, embarrassed by himself, erased the lines and scanned the documents instead. He wasn't in a movie. He wanted the record to look like a lawyer's, not a man's wall. At 7, he walked to Sophie's sister's house with a bag of groceries. No notice, no speech prepared. He rang and waited. Sophie opened the door only as far as the chain. For a second, they just looked at each other. The person they'd loved standing behind the person they'd learned to fear. "I brought food," he said, lifting the bag like a white flag. "No reason. I just wanted to do a useful thing." She unlatched the chain and took the bag. They ate already. "It keeps," he said, and almost smiled. She studied him. You look tired, but not the same kind. I'm working. On what? On not becoming him. A breath that was almost a laugh. How's that going? Hourly, he said. She hesitated, then stepped aside. 10 minutes. He stood just inside the door, not crossing the invisible line where the shoes piled, and the girls' backpacks leaned like small animals sleeping. The TV light flashed blue in the living room. Cartoons muttered to themselves. Grace is drawing, Sophie said. Ella's pretending she doesn't watch the news. He swallowed. I'm trying to keep your names out of this. You can't keep names out of a storm, she said. You can only choose not to throw anything else into the wind. Her voice gentled. If you want to see them Saturday, I'll meet you at the park. Public open safe. Thank you. She nodded, started to close the door, hesitated. Ethan, whatever you're doing, if it feels good, wait 12 hours and ask if it still feels right. He carried that sentence home like a pocket stone. Turned it over all night. At 2 a.m., his phone vibrated unknown. He almost didn't answer. Still awake, Howard's voice brighter than it had any right to be. Figured. Men with nothing sleep too much or not at all. Ethan stood very still. Get to it. You think you've done something? Howard said, cheerfully venomous. You haven't. I've been broke before. People like me don't stay there. You've been helped before, Ethan said. People like me made you tall. A beat of silence. Then softer. You always wanted to believe you were better than me. That's cute. You're just slower. Ethan let the words pass through him like weather. The old urge, to hit back with anything sharp, rose-crested broke. When it ebbed, something calmer stood where it had been. I'm not calling the press, he said. I'm not breaking your windows. I'm giving the truth to people who keep records. Truth is just a story with good lighting, Howard said. And I own the lamps. Not this time. Then we'll see which of us is more patient, Howard murmured. I built a career on waiting for men to tire. The line clicked dead. Ethan stared at the dark phone and didn't throw it. He set it face down on the obsession pile and went back to the documents. He worked until morning, sent the next packet to the AG with a subject line that could have been a prayer corroboration attached. He copied Mara Patel, the quiet, relentless attorney who'd helped him once with forms he couldn't afford, and asked simply, If you have time to glance, tell me what's missing. He expected nothing. She replied at 6:41 a.m. I'll review. Keep your hands clean. He laughed, surprised by joy. People existed who spoke like that. They were the kind who built bridges and slept because the math made sense. Saturday at the park, Grace ran to him with a drawing, a stick figure family holding hands beneath a rectangle with a triangle on top. House she had printed all caps. A sun hovered crowded by small clouds. Is this ours? He asked. Not yet, she said, practical, but maybe. He looked up at Sophie, who was watching from the bench, a book open but unread in her lap. Maybe he echoed and meant it the way a carpenter means level. After the park, he walked the long way home. The city's light felt different, less like neon, more like weather. He passed a storefront where a tailor stood in the window, bent over a hem mouth full of pins. The posture was reverent. Work done right looked like prayer. Back in the apartment, he opened the drawer and took out the photograph of Sophie and the girls. He held it a long time, then fed it to the shredder. The machine buzzed, choked, and let go. The strips fell into the bin like rain. He cleaned the desk, filed the justice stack, put the empty mug in the sink. Then he wrote on a blank page, Rules for the war I can live with. No headlines, no spills into their lives. Truth only. Stop when the law starts. Remember what the win is not his ruin, our peace. He taped the list to the wall where the corkboard had been. The room looked larger without the web. The silence felt earned. Outside, the freeway muttered. A gull cried like a hinge. Somewhere, a man who believed himself unbreakable rehearsed a smile in a mirror. Ethan closed his eyes and pictured instead the steady hand of a tailor threading a needle. He breathed to that rhythm. Justice would take time. Obsession begged for speed. He chose time and sat back down. The investigation that Ethan had begun in silence was no longer his. By May, it had become a storm. The newspapers printed Howard's name daily, pairing it with words like fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Investors filed suits faster than the courts could process them. The city's skyline, the one Howard had helped build, now felt like a collection of monuments to deceit. Ethan watched it all from the margins, equal parts vindicated and hollow. He should have felt triumphant. Instead, he felt hunted. Every morning he scanned the headlines as if reading his own obituary. Blake and Associates, CEO, denies wrongdoing. Sources suggest insider tip sparked federal inquiry. Possible link to offshore holdings under review. He could feel the shadow of that last line creeping toward him. If the investigators looked hard enough, they'd find the anonymous packages, the timestamps, the IP trail. Lena had warned him, "You're not invisible, Ethan. Just quiet." Quiet wasn't enough anymore. The weight of victory. Lena called late one evening, her voice tight. "He's coming apart," she said. "His staff's walking out. 2 arrests in accounting already. And someone told the SEC about your mailings." Ethan froze. "They can't trace them to me. They don't need to. Howard's telling everyone the leak came from you. That's impossible. Not if he has access to your name, your address, your life." He stood by the window looking at the rain-slick streets below. "He's bluffing. Then why are there 2 unmarked cars parked outside my building?" she whispered. His stomach dropped. "Lena, don't call again," she said and hung up. He tried calling back, but the number was dead. The silence afterward was suffocating. For months, revenge had been his fuel. Now it turned into poison. The consequences weren't abstract anymore. They had faces, names, people who could vanish overnight. He poured a drink, then another. Outside, sirens pulsed through the night like a countdown. A knock at the door. It came at 3:17 a.m. 3 sharp knocks that shattered the fragile quiet. Ethan froze, glass in hand. The knocks came again. "Mr. Miller, San Francisco Police." He set the glass down, heart hammering. Through the peephole, 2 men in plain clothes stood under the flickering hallway light. One held up a badge. He opened the door halfway. "What is this?" "Routine inquiry," the taller one said. "We'd like to ask about your involvement with Blake and Associates." Ethan's pulse roared in his ears. "I don't work there. Your name appears in several communications tied to an anonymous whistleblower report. Mind if we come in?" He hesitated. Refusing would make him look guilty. "Sure," he said, stepping aside. They entered, scanning the sparse apartment. One officer glanced at the corkboard, now stripped bare except for a few harmless notes. "Mind telling us how you came by this information?" the other asked. "I read the news, same as everyone," Ethan said evenly. "Funny," the taller one said, "because your old colleague Ms. Patel says she received documents from an anonymous source using your initials." Ethan's mouth went dry. "Then maybe someone's framing me," maybe, the officer said. "But if it's a frame, it's a neat one. You've got a lawyer." "I will." They exchanged a look, then handed him a card. "Don't leave the city, Mr. Miller. We'll be in touch." When the door shut, Ethan collapsed against it, breathing hard. His reflection in the mirror across the room looked foreign, eyes wild, face drawn. He had wanted justice. Now justice was knocking on his door. Exposure. By morning, the news cycle had turned brutal. A local station aired leaked footage, Ethan leaving Blake and Associates security escorting him out. The caption read, "Source of whistleblower tip identified." He watched it in disbelief, the grainy video looping endlessly. His phone vibrated non-stop. Texts from unknown numbers, half of them insults, half of them offers for interviews. Then came Sophie's call. "Ethan, what did you do?" "It's not true," he said. "They're twisting it. The girls' school called. Parents are asking if you're a criminal." "I'm not. I don't even know who you are anymore." Her voice broke on the last word. Then the line went dead. Ethan stared at the phone until the screen dimmed. The apartment seemed to shrink around him. He went to the desk, tore open the folder that held Lena's files, and started burning them one by one in the sink. The paper curled and blackened, the smoke filling the air with the bitter smell of loss. When the last page turned to ash, he whispered, "There's no going back." A visit from the past. That night, a message arrived from an unknown number. "Lena, they raided my office. I'm safe for now. You need to disappear." "Ethan, I can't." He threatened my family. "Lena, then stop thinking like a victim. Do something." The text blinked on the screen, harsh and alive. "Do something." He looked at the clock. 11:42 p.m. He grabbed his coat. If Howard wanted a war, he'd get one. The City at Midnight was a script written in neon and steam. Ethan drove it like a man reading ahead. His hands tight on the wheel, the streetlights smearing into commas. He had no patience to observe. He didn't go to Howard's club. Not again. He went where men like Howard hid things they didn't want to explain. Lena called it the cold room. Off-site, low profile, a rented space in a boxy building south of the stadium where the street names were letters and the windows were painted shut. She hadn't given him an address. She'd given him a hint during the laundromat meeting without meaning to. "If you ever need me, I'm 2 blocks from the old cannery." Everyone parks in the lot with the cracked blue gate. It was throwaway geography, the kind people use to locate themselves in their towns. Ethan had put it on a post-it and never asked why it felt important. He found the cracked blue gate by instinct and stubbornness, then circled the block twice until the security camera's red dot turned its blind side. He pulled into the lot, killed the engine, and sat while his heart slowed enough to pass for thinking. A freight elevator rattled somewhere inside the building. He crossed the asphalt shoulders hunched, listening for footsteps that didn't belong to his own. The lobby smelled like old paper and disinfectant. A row of metal mailboxes wore names that sounded like lies: Covenant Holdings, Gardenia Enterprises, Blue Water MGMT. He put his palm on Blue Water and felt the thrum of recognition go up his arm like a shock. No concierge, no guard. A sign-in clipboard sat on a laminate counter with a pen on a chain. He didn't sign it. He took the stairs. On the second-floor hallway, lights flickered, a failing rhythm. Doors with frosted glass windows lined the corridor, each labeled with vinyl letters. Suite 212, Archive Storage. Suite 214, Private Records. Suite 216, Blue Water MGMT. The handle gave after a stubborn second. Inside cold air humming units, the smell of toner and dust and money. Metal shelves marched the length of the room, stacked with bankers' boxes, Q4 Recon vendor files subsidiary, Aurora travel receipts, K1's official. The word official had the sloppy bravado of a 4-year-old writing "keep out" over a treasure map. He closed the door behind him and stood very still. The fear that had been burning a hole in his chest since the police visit was still there. But under it, something steadier had returned, the old, quiet competency that let him walk a half-built property and see where the load-bearing lived. He breathed through his nose, let his eyes adjust, and moved to the shelves. He didn't rifle. He chose. Aurora first, then travel, then a thin binder marked comp. Board approvals in a careful hand that did not look like Howard's. He opened the binder and felt the floor under his life tilt. Emails printed and tabbed. Minutes of a board meeting that had never been filed. A memo on letterhead noting temporary reallocation of client escrow funds with signatures he knew. A paragraph where CC lines linked Aurora to Blue Water to a personal trust in Howard's wife's maiden name. And in the margin of one page, a dead giveaway masquerading as a joke: Umbrella Day. Move the rain. HB. Umbrella Day. He could almost hear the smirk as the pen made the letters. He took out his phone, turned off the sound, and started making scans. Page after page, hands steady, breath even. He wasn't sending them anywhere yet, wasn't writing the email to the AG in his head. He was just collecting proof like a man filling a well. The click of the outer lock sounded like a gunshot. He froze, binder open, phone in his hand. The door handle turned. He moved without deciding, stepping behind the tall filing cabinet nearest the door, pressing himself into the shadow it cast. The room was a grid of angles. He made himself into one. The door opened. Two men came in. The weight of their steps said security, not clerks. Behind them came the voice Ethan knew so well that his throat closed around it. 10 minutes, Howard said, annoyed, breathless. I know exactly what I'm looking for. Of course he did. Paranoia makes archivists. Ethan didn't breathe. Sweat slid between his shoulder blades, cold as doubt. He could make a sound now, step out and try to finish the argument he'd rehearsed for months. Or he could watch and learn how men like this behaved when they thought no one was recording. He chose the second option, and it saved him and damned him in the same minute. Howard walked 3 shelves in and stopped. Blue water. Board approvals. Here. Paper rasped. A binder opened. An impatient exhale. Who was last in here? Don't know, sir. One of the security guys said, the kind who practices deference the way athletes practice drills. These are out of order. A pause. And the page. The binder snapped shut. They're not going to find it before the injunction if we move the boxes. Take anything stamped Aurora, anything that says K1, and anything with signatures. Put them in the elevator. Call the driver. Ethan looked at the 2 boxes he'd already pulled to the edge of the shelf, the slight gap he hadn't pushed back. He looked at the binder in Howard's hands, and for one acid second, the satisfaction was so bright, it made him lightheaded. I got here first. He told himself to stay where he was. The smart play was to let them move their incrimination out into the open, to call it in, and watch the cameras do his work. The smart play was to keep his word to Sophie and to the version of himself he'd written in the rules. Howard's next line burned the rules clean through. And have someone swing by the school tomorrow, he said, voice casual. Make sure Sophie's comfortable. Send one of our community outreach people. Smile, pat the principal's hand. Assure them we're not those kind of people. I want the story clean by the weekend. The smaller guard chuckled. The wife's still pretty. Howard ignored him. Clear the board. Move the rain. Something primitive in Ethan's chest stood up. He stepped out from behind the cabinet, voice already there before he found its owner. Tell your men to stay away from my family. Time stopped, or pretended to. The guards spun hands, going to belts out of habit. Howard's face did something he'd never allowed it to do in public. It showed the truth before the disguise arrived. Ethan, he said, and for once his smile was late. You never learned doors are for knocking. You never learned no means no. Howard flicked 2 fingers. The larger guard took a step forward. Ethan raised the phone. The lens caught fluorescent glare. One more step, and the whole city watches this in an hour. Your boxes, your voice, your umbrella day. The guard paused. Howard's eyes narrowed in the way of a man measuring the cost of force against the benefit of performance. He put the binder down very slowly, like a hostage negotiator placing a gun on a table. This is trespassing, he said almost gently. And desperation is not a legal defense. You sent someone to photograph my family, Ethan said. He felt his hands shaking and told them they were allowed to. You sent people to scare my daughters. Howard tilted his head. You really think you can scare me by calling me what I am? I think I can end you by making you look like it, Ethan said, surprised at his own calm. The smaller guard moved again, impatient. Ethan shifted the phone to his left hand, reached back without looking, and closed his right hand around the cold steel of a binding bar that leaned against the cabinet. One of those flat metal arms that keep folders upright. It wasn't heavy. It didn't have to be. Don't, Ethan said. The tone, quiet parental final, made both guards check their momentum for the heartbeat he needed. Howard smiled, finally catching up to himself. You won't swing, he said. You're not that kind of man. Ethan didn't know if that was true. The not knowing was a cliff under his feet. Walk away, he said. Leave the boxes. Leave the binder. Call off your dogs. Then go home and practice saying no comment until the indictments arrive. Howard's eyes softened with a pity so exquisite it was almost art. You think the world is waiting to catch you, Ethan? It isn't. It's waiting to see if you slip. He nodded at the binder. Take it. You need a prop. It's the only way your story looks taller than you are. Something hot and sharp leaped in Ethan's throat. He took a step forward without meaning to. The smaller guard moved. The larger guard grabbed for Ethan's wrist. The room collapsed into angles and breath, and the metallic scrape of things not intended as weapons becoming weapons anyway. The binding bar swung. Not hard. Hard enough. It connected with the larger guard's forearm. The man grunted, surprised, not hurt. The smaller guard came in low, training more zeal than wisdom, clipped Ethan's hip, and the three of them went into the shelf. Boxes slid. Paper fanned. The official box split like a cheap suitcase. Umbrella Day spilled over the floor. Someone's elbow hit Ethan's ribs. Air left his body. He punched blindly, a short, ugly punch that belonged to someone he didn't recognize. The smaller guard fell backward, banging his head on the lowest shelf, with a sound that changed the temperature in the room. Enough, Howard said, and his voice had a quaver in it that didn't belong to him. Ethan was already up, binding bar in his hand chest, heaving. The larger guard reached again. Ethan fainted. The bar whistled through fluorescent air and stopped an inch from the man's face because some old piece of himself reached up and caught his wrist from the inside. That pause cost him. The larger guard twisted, yanked the bar free, and shoved Ethan into the shelving. Metal sang. Binders rained down. Comp. Board approvals, vendor Q4 recon, and one hard spine caught Ethan high on the cheekbone. Light flared in his skull. He slid, felt the floor come up fast and unkind. When his vision cleared, Howard was kneeling over him, the kind of careful crouch you do in expensive pants. He leaned in so close Ethan could count the pores he covered with camera-ready foundation. You should have taken my generosity when I offered it, he whispered. You could have stayed the friend who cries at parties and calls it loyalty. Tell your men to stay away from my family, Ethan said. His mouth tasted like iron. Or I will teach you what a man without a home can live through. Howard looked at him for a long time, and for once neither of them pretended the other was kidding. Then he stood, gestured to the guards, and dusted an invisible speck from his cuff. Call the police, he said, bored again. Tell them we found a trespasser attempting to destroy records. He looked back down. Break something small on your way out, Ethan. It will make the report tidier. He turned to leave. The part of Ethan that had learned patience. Letters to the AG scanned pages, the 5 rules, said, let him walk. Let the call go through. Let the uniforms come and write it down. Let the law do the heavy lift you can't. Another part, new hot starving, said, make him stop breathing that way when he says your daughter's school out loud. Ethan grabbed the nearest binder comp, board approvals, and threw it. Not at Howard's head, but at the wall just beside the door. The thud was theatrical and stupid, and did nothing except announce to everyone on the floor that room 2116 contained a man who'd lost the plot. The hallway filled with footsteps. Someone yelled security from far away, the way people call fire in a theater, to be useful without getting near the smoke. Howard's smile recovered, bright as a wound. There, he said softly. Now we both look like what we are. Sirens began somewhere outside, distant, approaching, inevitable. Ethan bent, grabbed the scattered emails, stuffed them into his jacket blind. He took 2 steps toward the door, and then in a move so fast it shocked the parts of himself that still kept time. He swung the binding bar down on Howard's wrist. The sound was small, meat and metal, not bone, but it was enough to make Howard yelp, to make the binder he'd been clutching drop, to turn his eyes into something that finally looked like the truth, fear. The larger guard lunged. Ethan ducked, shoved, ran. Papers skated under his shoes. He hit the corridor at speed and chose the stairs because elevators are where men get caught in their reflections. Down one flight, 2, 3. The sirens were nearer now, a chorus turning into a single note. He burst into the alley behind the storage building and swallowed the cold air until it hurt. He should have kept running. He should have thrown the bar into the dumpster and the jacket into fire. He turned the corner into the lot and nearly collided with 2 uniforms. Hands, one shouted, already drawing. Hands now. Ethan froze. The binding bar clanged to the asphalt. He lifted his hands slowly, palms out, the jacket gaping open enough to show the pages he had not meant to steal. Behind the officers, red and blue began to strobe against the cracked blue gate. Above them, a camera's red dot blinked awake, and for the first time in months, it faced exactly where he stood. Ethan Miller, the taller officer, asked, "You're under arrest." For what Ethan said, though, the answer was already walking toward him in the uniform's eyes. Trespass. Suspicion of tampering with evidence. The officer hesitated as his radio crackled with new information. And assault. They turned him, cool hands on hot arms, and the cuffs bit down with the rude intimacy of consequence. The metal kissed the cut on his wrist, and the sting was so clean it felt like relief. Over the tops of the cruisers, he could see the open storage door, and beyond it, the hallway where Howard had just appeared, pale and perfect, cradling a wrist that would bruise like an admission. Their eyes met across the distance. Howard's smile was back. It was smaller now, but it was there, and it said, "I told you you'd slip." A phone chimed in Ethan's pocket. Impossible since his hands were cuffed. One of the officers fished it out, glanced at the screen, and his professional blankness faltered. Officer Ethan said, because he no longer had the right to say, "Please." The man looked at him, then at the notification, then at the man again. "It's a school alert," he said. "Lockdown at Parkview Elementary. Report of suspicious individuals on campus." The world narrowed to a tunnel. "My daughter's," Ethan said. His voice broke on the plural. "Sir, we have to." "Please," he said, and the word felt like swallowing glass. "Please, that's where they are." The second officer's radio crackled again, louder, urgent. "Units be advised, Parkview Elementary. Possible domestic threat tied to the Blake investigation." Howard in the doorway watched the information float across the cars to the cuffed man it belonged to. For the first time all night, he didn't smile. Officer Ethan said, shaking now, "Either you take me there or you shoot me because I will run." The taller cop looked at the cruiser, at the cuffs, at the man, and the sirens, and the red dot blinking above the cracked blue gate. Decision is a moment and a wait. "Get him in," he said, opening the back door. "We'll divert." They shoved Ethan into the car. The door slammed. The world became glass and fabric, and his own breath ricocheting off it. He pressed his forehead to the window as the cruiser screamed into the street, the storage building shrinking behind them, the red and blue bleeding into purple. He closed his eyes and did the only prayer he knew counted. 1, 2, 3. The numbers were steady even when everything else wasn't. But between 3 and 4, a picture forced itself into the space counting, had cleared Ellis's hand, in Grace's the way they looked for Sophie when they were told to be brave. Outside, the city broke open to let the cruiser through. Inside, Ethan's heart learned a new verb for regret. The holding cell smelled of sweat, disinfectant, and the kind of fear men never admit to. Ethan sat on the narrow bench, wrists raw beneath the cuffs, head pounding from the fluorescent hum. Time had slowed into a thick substance, and he was sinking in it. Every few minutes, a guard walked past the bars and glanced in. None of them spoke. They didn't need to. Ethan's face had been on every screen in the city by now. Real estate whistleblower shoots. Blake's security guard at school. The kind of headline that sold papers and justified anger. He wasn't sure how long he'd been there when the door clanked, and Sergeant Reeves appeared with a file under one arm. "Your lawyer's here," Reeves said. Ethan blinked. "I don't have one." "You do now." The sergeant stepped aside, and a woman in a navy suit entered. Sharp eyes, unflustered gait. Mara Patel, the pro bono attorney, who had once helped him with those first documents. She sat opposite him, placed her briefcase on the bench between them. "You look worse than the headlines," she said quietly. "I killed him. You defended yourself. They won't see it that way. Then we'll teach them how to." She opened the file. Ballistics show the gun discharged during a struggle. No residue on your dominant hand. There's a case here if we can keep you from destroying it. He gave a hollow laugh. "Howard will bury me." "Howard is the reason you're still alive," she said. And when he looked up sharply, she added, "His company's under federal investigation. The men who attacked the school were off-duty security, Blake assets. He can't distance himself fast enough. He's already bleeding out in the press." "Then why am I the one in chains?" "Because you gave them an image they could use," she said, sliding the photo across the table, the still from the school hallway. "You look like vengeance, not justice. Juries love stories. Ours needs a better one. A city that eats its own." The next morning they transferred him to county jail. Reporters lined the steps like vultures shouting questions that blurred into static. "Did you intend to kill him? Were you hired by rival developers? Are you and Howard Blake former partners?" He kept his eyes down, chains clinking against the asphalt. Inside, the noise changed texture. Echoes instead of shouts. He was booked, printed, stripped, issued the orange that erased names. Nights in jail had their own clock, the clang at 8 p.m., the murmur of card games, the fluorescent twilight that never ended. Ethan lay awake and rewound the moment of the shot until it lost sound. In silence, it almost looked accidental. In memory, it always was. Days blurred. He ate, he read, he waited. Mara visited twice a week, building the scaffolding of defense out of small mercies, the lack of residue, the blurred camera angle, the testimony of frightened teachers who saw two men enter with guns before Ethan ran in. She told him Howard had vanished from public view. "He's living in Marin," she said during one meeting. "Lawyers around him like bodyguards. The SEC froze his accounts yesterday." Ethan felt no triumph, only exhaustion. "And Lina," Mara hesitated. "She's gone underground. There's a federal subpoena with her name on it. She's probably safer than either of you." He nodded slowly. "If she gets caught, tell her I never meant for it to go this far." "You think this is about intent," Mara said gently. "It's about story. Everyone needs a villain." He looked down at his scarred wrists. "I gave them one. The trial begins." 4 months later, the courtroom smelled of old wood and coffee. Ethan stood beside Mara at the defense table, the cuffs gone but the bruises still visible. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but the world was watching anyway. Howard Blake sat at the prosecution's bench as interested party, his wrist wrapped in a neat brace, face immaculate. He didn't look at Ethan once. The prosecutor painted the narrative quickly, a disgruntled employee obsessed with revenge who broke into company property, then into a school, and shot a man. Each word landed like a stone. Mara's defense was quieter but sharper, a whistleblower who exposed corruption, then tried to protect his family when the corrupt struck back. She showed the emails Lina had smuggled out, the invoices, the offshore transfers. Each sheet of paper became a crack in the prosecution's wall. On the third day, a detective testified that the men who invaded the school were hired through a shell company tied to Blake and Associates. The jury murmured. Howard's lawyers objected. The judge overruled. By the end of the week, the city's sympathy began to shift, slowly, like a tide learning a new rhythm. But not far enough. When the prosecution rested, Mara leaned toward him. "We can take a plea," she whispered. "Manslaughter. 5 years, maybe 3 with good behavior. And if we don't, you could walk out of here free or never again." He looked at the jury box, at faces he'd never seen before and never would again. And thought of Sophie, of the girls drawing houses with sons too big for the paper. "We finish it," he said. The cross-examination. When Howard finally took the stand, the room went quiet, in the way churches do before confession. He spoke like a man reading a eulogy for someone he didn't know, measured sorrow eyes moist on cue. He called Ethan a dear friend and a troubled man. He described the night of the break-in at the storage unit, the confrontation, the violence. He never mentioned the words Umbrella Day. Mara rose, legal pad in hand. Mr. Blake, you testified that your company had no connection to the men who entered Parkview Elementary on the night in question. Is that correct? Yes. She flipped a page. Would you read this line from Exhibit F, please? Howard adjusted his glasses. Authorized 2 contractors to handle the school problem. And who wrote that email? He hesitated. An assistant. Whose account? Mine. The courtroom shifted. Chairs creaked. Throats cleared. Mr. Blake, Mara said softly, is it fair to say that had those contractors not been sent, no one would have entered that school? Howard's lawyer objected. The judge overruled. Yes, he said tightly. No further questions. Mara sat. She didn't smile, but the small nod she gave Ethan said enough. Outside reporters were already using a new phrase Howard Blake implicated. Sophie. That night back in his cell, a guard called through the bars. You got a visitor. Sophie stepped inside the narrow room. She looked thinner, older, but her eyes hadn't lost their color. I wasn't sure I should come, she said. I wasn't sure I deserved it. You didn't, she said, then sighed. But the girls keep asking when they can see you. I told them when the truth is finished. He smiled weakly. The truth is expensive, so is forgiveness. She stepped closer. What happens now? Tomorrow's closing arguments. Then the jury decides if I'm a murderer or a man who made a mistake. And what are you? He met her eyes, both. She nodded, tears glinting. Grace still draws houses. In every one there's a stick man standing outside. She says he's waiting for the door to open. He felt his throat tighten. Tell her I'm knocking. The courthouse was packed for the closing arguments. Every bench filled every aisle, crowded with reporters pretending to be silent. Rain streaked the high windows. It sounded like the city itself was holding its breath. Mara stood first. No theatrics, just her low, even voice tracing a story the jury could live inside. A man trusted his friend, she began. That trust was weaponized. The man lost his home, his wife, his children. He chose the only power left to him, truth, and for telling it, his family was threatened. You saw the evidence. You read the emails. You know who sent men to that school. Justice, she said, isn't about who bled last. It's about who stood up first. She sat. Howard's lawyers followed with fire and polish, painting Ethan as reckless, unhinged, dangerous. The jurors' faces didn't move, but their eyes did, back and forth, weighing lives like numbers. When the gavel came down that evening, the air cracked like static. Court is adjourned until verdict, the judge said. Ethan walked out between 2 deputies. The crowd parted around him as though grief carried contagion. Waiting. 2 days of waiting is a year lived wrong. Ethan spent the first pacing the cell, the second sitting on the cot, replaying every frame of the hallway. Sometimes in his mind, he saved the man. Sometimes he didn't shoot at all. Sometimes the gun stayed a gun. Sometimes it became everything that had ever gone wrong. On the 3rd morning, the guard unlocked the door. Verdict's in. He followed wrists unshackled for the optics, but read where the cuffs had lived. In the corridor, Mara met his eyes. Whatever happens, she said, remember what you already did right. You told the truth. They entered together. The verdict. The jury foreman's voice was thin with nerves. On the count of manslaughter, we find the defendant not guilty. The sound that filled the room wasn't applause. It was exhale relief, breaking like glass. Ethan's knees almost gave out. On the second charge, trespass with intent, the verdict was guilty, but the judge dismissed it with time served. He was free, technically. Howard rose halfway from his seat, pale as if the blood had been taken as evidence. Cameras flashed even though they weren't supposed to. A murmur spread Blake under federal review. Mara turned to him, whispered, "It's over." Ethan shook his head. Not yet. Ashes of an empire. Within weeks, Blake and associates began to collapse. Federal indictments landed like hammers. Lena's files resurfaced. Now official exhibits. Every fraudulent company Ethan had mapped in pencil appeared in print. The empire folded under the weight of its own signatures. One morning, Mara handed him a newspaper. Blake charged in fraud tax evasion. Below it, a smaller line. Former employee cleared of criminal charges. He stared at the page for a long time. "That's what freedom looks like," he asked quietly. "It's what's left after fire," she said. He walked out into the city. The wind off the bay smelled clean. For the first time in months, no one followed him. Yet every reflection still carried Howard's shape. Rebuilding. Sophie let him see the girls again. Small, supervised visits at the park. Grace ran to him without hesitation. Ella hung back, studying him like a sketch she wasn't sure was finished. He brought them a kite. It tangled immediately. They laughed anyway. Sophie watched from a distance. When the girls ran off chasing the kite, she came closer. "They're talking about us again," she said. "Reporters." "They'll get bored," he said. "Will you?" He looked at her, tired. "I don't know how to be bored anymore." Her eyes softened. "Then learn." The last offer. That night, a letter waited on his doorstep. No return address. The handwriting was familiar, too smooth, too sure. "Ethan, we both know prison won't hold me forever. The city will forget you before it forgets me. If you want peace, meet me where this started. Pier 17, midnight. Leave the police out of it. One conversation, one ending. H.O. He read it twice, then a third time. He should have torn it up. He didn't. At 11:40, he drove toward the water. The pier. Fog rolled in from the bay, swallowing the city's edges. The wooden planks creaked under his shoes. At the far end, under a rusted lamppost, Howard waited. No guards this time, just the cold and the gulls. "You came," Howard said. His voice carried strangely in the fog. "You wanted a conversation." "I wanted a witness," Howard corrected. "To what happens when the world decides who's hero and who's monster." "You made that decision for both of us," Ethan said. Howard smiled faintly. "And you carried it out. Tell me, when you pulled that trigger, did you hear my name or yours?" Ethan stepped closer. "You ruined everything I loved." "I revealed what you were," Howard said. "You built a life on trust. I built mine on truth. Look who's still standing." Ethan stared at him. The perfect coat, the unbroken posture, and saw not power but emptiness wearing its clothes. He could end it right here, a shove, a splash, the bay's dark erasure. He took another step. Howard didn't move. "You think killing me fixes it," Howard said softly. "Then do it. Give them the ending they expect." Ethan's hands clenched. The image rose unbidden. Sophie's eyes. Grace's drawings. Ella's silence. The version of himself who would throw this man into the black water was already dead. He stepped back. "No," he said. "You don't get that from me." Howard's smile faltered just a crack. "You'll never be rid of me. I already am." Ethan turned, walked away. Behind him, the bay lapped against the pylons, patient and ancient. He didn't look back. The collapse. He was halfway to the parking lot when he heard the sound. A single small splash followed by a shout that turned into nothing. He ran back, fog tearing at his face. The lamppost still burned. The space beneath it was empty. He looked over the edge. Only ripples. No body. Sirens somewhere too far to matter. He stood there until the fog swallowed the water again. Fog sheathed the pier in damp linen. Ethan stood with the cold in his teeth and waited for the water to give him an answer. It didn't. The bay was an old liar. It told only the truths it could keep. By the time he dialed 911, his hands had gone numb. He gave the dispatcher the facts like beads on a string, time, place, name. He did not say, "I wanted him dead once." He did not say, "I walked away." Blue light splashed the fog. An officer took his statement while another swept a flashlight across the black water, as if illumination were a net. Coast Guard called. Divers called. Tape unfurled. The city's nocturnal audience gathered in clumps, faces lifted like flowers toward the sirens. "Why were you here, Mr. Miller?" the sergeant asked. "He asked me to meet Ethan," said. "A letter. Do you have it?" "I burned it," he lied. then corrected himself because the evening had taught him what kind of man a lie made. No, it's in my car. They retrieved the envelope from his glove box, Ziploc sealed it, as if paper could drown. The sergeant read the single paragraph, mouth flattening, then nodded once, the way men nod when a story is too neat to trust. Dawn came, with its own interrogation. Cameras, microphones, card carrying, indignation. The headline wrote itself before anyone filed it. Disgraced developer vanishes off pier, rival whistleblower last to see him. You could almost hear the producers clap. Mara arrived with hair damp from a shower taken too fast. She stood with him just beyond the tape, watched a gull land on a bollard, and scold the river for not being bred. Tell me everything, she said. He did. Even the shove that didn't happen, even the wish that had. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were judge plain. You called first. You stayed. You told the truth. That's the best case we were going to get. For him, Ethan asked. For you, she said, and then gentler, and maybe for him too. They found nothing that morning. The fog lifted, the sun glanced off the water like nothing had been asked of it, and the bay kept its secret. The investigation, in the days that followed, rumor did what it always does, solved a mystery with the facts it wanted. Some said Howard had fallen. Some said he had staged a death, slipped into another name, another city, another life. A blogger posted photos of a man in Buenos Aires with Howard's posture drinking coffee without Howard's face. The comments decided that was proof. Police decided very little. They took Ethan's clothes, logged the salt line on his cuffs, measured the distance from lamppost to edge, and the distance from the story to the ground. They watched the one shaky security camera on Pier 17 until the grain became narrative. Two men speaking in fog, one walking away, and then the nothing that made everything. Mara argued in a room that required no microphones. No body, no blood, no push, no case, she said. My client called 911. He didn't run. She said client like a shield and he like a name. They let Ethan go again. Not exonerated, unpursued, which is what passes for mercy in cities that have already spent their budget on spectacle. He walked home through streets that looked at him. The apartment door stuck as usual. The bulb in the stairwell still hummed. The ordinary waited stubbornly for the world to stop shouting. Lena texted from a number that would not work tomorrow. He won't haunt you if you refuse to perform for ghosts. He typed, is he dead? And then because that question felt like a wish in disguise, he deleted it and wrote, are you safe? She sent an ellipsis that felt like a shrug. For now. Don't call. The price. A week later, he met Sophie at a small cafe that smelled like butter and reason. She ordered tea, then forgot to drink it. Is he? She began. I don't know, he said. Honesty belonged to her. She nodded. It's strange. I wanted him to face a courtroom, not a myth. The myth might be the punishment, Ethan said. Men like him hate ambiguity. They need to be seen to exist. You too, she said, not unkindly. He watched steam lift from her cup. I won the verdict. I told the truth. I still hear the shot when I brush my teeth. Then live a life that can hold that sound, she said. Not win against it. Hold it, he swallowed. Can I see the girls this Sunday? You can take them to the museum, she said. Big rooms, small voices. A smile tugged. They're collecting all the dragon sculptures for a school project. Grace says dragons are just lonely dinosaurs that learned fire. Sounds right, he said. Sophie looked at him for a long moment. You didn't push him. No, he said. But I wanted to. She nodded. That wanting is the thing to pay for. How, he asked. Every day, she said, and reached for his hand the way a person checks the temperature of a kettle. Carefully ready to pull back. She didn't. Restitution. A month later, with Mara's help, Ethan stood in front of a judge in a different courtroom, the kind with bad ventilation and good intentions, and pled to a lesser trespass charge tied to the storage unit. He paid a fine that hurt, in the way relief hurts. He accepted community service hours that the city pretended it could count. He stayed after each shift and stacked chairs until no chairs remained. He sold the car that still smelled like Parkview. He took the bus, sat with the city at eye level, listened to strangers narrate their lives. He learned to name the neighborhoods by the way the wind changed. He got a job no one could headline housing coordinator at a nonprofit that stopped foreclosures when it could and cushioned the fall when it couldn't. He sat at a metal desk and translated banks into English. Twice a week, he went to a church basement off Mission and taught first-time buyers how signatures were promises with teeth. He told them a story about a man who thought loyalty could be collateral. He never said the man was him. They understood anyway. Sophie brought the girls to the museum on Sundays. Ella asked quiet questions about negative space. Grace ran to every plaque like words were animals. After they ate sandwiches on the steps and watched the park perform itself. Sometimes Sophie stayed. Sometimes she walked a lap around the block and returned as if absence were a small vacation. At night, the apartment window framed a rectangle of city that would never make a postcard. He liked it for that. He kept the corkboard bare except for one-page rules for the war. I can live with now rewritten without the word war. Rules for the life I can live with. Truth first even when it embarrasses me. No headlines ever again. Don't outsource courage to anger. If I don't know, admit it. The win is not his ruin, our peace. He taped it next to the girls' new drawings, a house with a sun, and now a stick figure standing in the doorway, not outside. The call from the bay. On a clear morning in late summer, a harbor patrolman phoned Mara. She phoned Ethan. He took the call on a bench near the playground, where the swing chains squeaked like birds. They found a body, she said. Male, approximate height and build. Face not recoverable. A watch on the wrist. His breath shortened into someone else's. His looks like it. Family will have to confirm. DNA will take time. She paused, then, if it's him, the scrutiny ends. And if it isn't, then the city will rehearse this until it tires. Her voice warmed. But you don't have to. He looked at the swings at a man pushing a child with the careful calculation of love. I don't know what to feel. You don't have to feel anything on schedule, Mara said. Grief and relief are cousins. They share a kitchen. He hung up and sat until the sun moved enough to change the color of the grass. He tried on various truths. He's dead. He isn't. He never was what you thought. You never were what you feared. None fit. He put them back on the rack. When he reached Sophie's building, Ella opened the door before he knocked. She had a notebook in her hand, and that new seriousness 9-year-olds wear, when the world has already told them it is a place with edges. I wrote something for school, she said, half proud, half shy. It's about heroes. Can I hear it? She nodded, cleared her throat the way performers on big stages do, because they learned it from movies. A hero, she read, is a person who chooses hard things that make the world softer. They don't always win. Sometimes they just hold on. Sometimes they say, I'm sorry, and mean it. Sometimes they break and then build. Sometimes a hero is a dad. He could not swallow for a moment. When he did, it hurt. Did your teacher like it? He asked. She said the last line was too personal, Ella said. I told her that's what makes it true. Your teacher is going to have a long, interesting year, he said, and hugged her. Grace barreled into them with 2 paper dragons flapping like misinterpreted birds. Mine breathe kindness, she announced. Not fire. Useful evolution, he said. Sophie watched from the kitchen doorway, dish towel in her hand, face unreadable in the way of women who have decided to take their time. You're early, she said. I am, he replied. I'm trying that now. She studied him, then held up a jar. Can you open this? Yes, he said, grateful for a problem his hands could solve. The lid gave with a sound like a small apology. He passed it back. She nodded. Dinner Sunday, she asked. At our place. Just food. I'd like that. It's not a promise, she said. It's progress, he said. What remains? That night, he walked down to the water alone. The bay was a mirror when it wanted to be, and a door when it didn't. Lights hopped along its surface in tidy lines, pretending order. He took the letter from his pocket, the one from the pier that the police had returned after taking their photographs and their comfort, and read it again. The ink had smudged where fog had licked it. He tore the page once, twice, then pressed the pieces into the palm of his hand like a ritual, and opened his fingers to let the wind take them. They skittered along the railing, lifted and fell into the dark. Goodbye, he said, not to a man but to an argument he had been losing for years. He stayed long enough to feel the air change temperature, then turned for home. On the way, he passed the storefront where a tailor had once bent over a hem. A new sign hung there now. Second stitch. Alterations and repairs. The light was on. Inside, a woman guided a needle through denim mouth full of pins, patience enough for strangers. Work done right still looked like prayer. When he reached his building, he climbed without counting. At the door, he paused, hand on the knob, and listened to the quiet inside. Not emptiness, space. He went in and sat at the desk. The page before him was blank and not terrified. He wrote a letter to the bank on behalf of a client who would not lose her house this time. He wrote a note to Lena he would never send, "I will be careful and I will be kind." He wrote to his daughters, "I am trying a new kind of bravery. It looks like staying." He put down the pen and looked at the city. Somewhere a verdict was still pending, in the river, in the newspapers, in the rooms where people told the night how it had behaved. In here, the decision had already been made. He said it out loud to be sure, "The price is living better." The words didn't ring, they settled. He left the window open and let the cool come in. What remains? The city never stopped moving, but Ethan had learned to walk at its gentler speed. Morning light seeped through the blinds of his small apartment, turning the dust into constellations. The old corkboard hung empty except for a family photo clipped to the center. Sophie, Ella, Grace, and him at the park. Nothing perfect about it. Wind messed their hair, half-closed eyes, crooked smiles. That imperfection made it true. He brewed coffee and poured it into the chipped mug that had survived everything. Outside, a siren wailed distant enough to belong to another life. He didn't flinch anymore. A life without headlines. 6 months had passed since the night on the pier. Howard's body had never been found. For a while, the news recycled theories, but the story had run out of oxygen. A developer's downfall was yesterday's scandal. The world needed new villains. Ethan's name still appeared occasionally, footnotes in articles about corporate whistleblowing or moral ambiguity in modern America. He ignored them. He preferred the anonymity of work at the housing nonprofit, the slow dignity of paperwork that saved people's roofs. He had become good at listening. Homeowners came to him shaking, desperate, ashamed. He met them with steady silence and maps with cups of coffee and sentences that began, "Let's see what we can do." He couldn't rebuild their lives entirely, but he could hold them steady while they tried. That was enough. The visit. One rainy afternoon, Sophie appeared at his office. No appointment, no warning. Her hair was damp, her coat dark with water. "I was nearby," she said, standing in the doorway. "Thought I'd stop by." He motioned toward the chair. "You're always welcome." She sat glancing at the stacks of folders. "You still doing this, helping everyone else keep their homes?" "It feels right," he said. "It should. You were good at building things before you forgot why." He smiled faintly. "I remember now." They sat in companionable quiet for a moment. Rain slid down the window like handwriting they couldn't read. "How are the girls?" he asked. "Ella won a science award," she said, pride softening her tone. "Grace writes stories. One of them had a dragon who became a teacher because he got tired of burning things." Ethan chuckled. "She gets that from you." "She gets the fire from you," Sophie replied. They shared a look that wasn't nostalgia but recognition, the strange peace of people who had survived each other's worst days. When she rose to leave, he said, "Dinner Sunday, still on."